Smoke drifted like a grey shroud over the ruined streets of Cologne, settling against the ancient stones of the cathedral that still stood scarred but unbroken after hundreds of air raids. On the afternoon of March 6, 1945, the war narrowed itself to a single intersection beneath those towering spires. Rubble shifted under the weight of distant engines. Somewhere beyond the haze, a German Panther waited, convinced that the old rules of armored warfare still held true. For nearly 2 years on the Western Front, German crews had lived by a simple expectation: American tanks would burn first. Sherman after Sherman had proven them right. Yet in those final weeks of World War II, something new moved among the ruins, something heavier, quieter, carrying a gun that could rewrite the odds. Few Germans had seen it. Fewer still understood what it meant. What happened next? The Cologne Cathedral tank duel, a 30-second clash later, known as Pershing versus Panther, would shatter one army's confidence and restore another's. But in that moment, as a lone American tank crept toward the cathedral's shadow, no one yet knew the cost of hesitation, or how quickly a war's myth could die. What does it take for a single decision, made in the smoke of a dying city, to change the course of belief itself? Long before the Cologne Cathedral tank duel unfolded beneath those Gothic towers, the war had already taught American crews a painful truth. On the open sands of North Africa in 1942, the first clashes between US armor and German panzers revealed a brutal imbalance. Shermans could reach the fight, but too often they could not survive it. Their 75mm guns struggled to penetrate German armor at distances where German gunners struck with calm certainty. It wasn't a matter of courage or maneuver. It was physics, and physics favored the enemy. Reports from Tunisia and later from Normandy painted the same picture. German tanks dominated the battlefield with lethal efficiency, creating the myth of German tank superiority that haunted American units. Crews joked about their Shermans being Ronsons, but behind the dark humor was real fear. A single Tiger had destroyed 25 Shermans in France. Panther battalions set ambushes that left entire platoons burning in minutes. For American tankers, the battlefield often felt like a narrow corridor in which every mistake meant fire. In Kentucky, far from the front, those reports collided with doctrine. At Fort Knox, engineers and officers debated what American armor should become. Some believed mobility mattered more than firepower. Others warned that no amount of speed could save a tank that could not kill its enemy. The idea of a heavier vehicle, something that could stand its ground against Panthers, gained quiet traction. And in the background, prototypes began to appear. The T-23, the T-25, designs that mounted a 90mm gun originally built to destroy aircraft at altitude. These turrets represented a new philosophy. American armor could no longer remain light and hopeful. It needed to be lethal, but doctrine blocked progress. General Leslie McNair insisted that tank destroyers, not tanks, should fight enemy armor. Production stalled. Prototypes gathered dust. Meanwhile, Sherman crews kept dying. Only in 1944 did the turning point come, and it came through bureaucratic sleight of hand. Engineers reclassified the new design not as a heavy tank, but as a medium, avoiding the restrictions that had strangled development. The T-26E3 was born. When it entered production, soldiers would give it a new name, M26 Pershing. Its statistics told their own story. 4 inches of frontal armor angled to deflect the Panther's long 70mm. A 90mm M3 gun capable of piercing German armor at 1,000 yards. A turret spacious enough for a gunner to work with precision rather than desperation. For the first time in years, there was a real chance to challenge the myth of German tank dominance. In January 1945, 20 Pershings crossed the Atlantic, assigned not to beginners, but to experienced crews. Among them was the team that would later define the words Pershing vs. Panther, Sergeant Robert Early Gunner, Clarence Smoyer, loader, John Durrigi, driver Bill McVeigh, and bow gunner Homer Davis. They had fought together for months, inside Shermans, scraping survival, out of armor, too thin for the enemies they faced. When they first climbed into their Pershing, they felt the difference immediately. The turret offered space to breathe. The armor felt solid beneath their palms, and the 90mm gun, stretching across the turret like a steel promise, spoke of a future in which American crews did not have to fear the first shot. Their tank Eagle 7 carried more than a new weapon. It carried the weight of every crew who had burned before them. By late February, as the 3rd Armored Division advanced toward the Ruhr River, Eagle 7 encountered its first Panther. Smoyer's shot cut through the German tank's frontal armor, an outcome no Sherman could have achieved. The report echoed across the division. The new tank worked, and with that realization, the long erosion of German confidence had quietly begun. By early March, the streets of Cologne had become a maze of shattered stone and smoke. The 3rd Armored Division pushed forward block by block, fighting a city that had already died, yet refused to surrender its ruins. German snipers held upper floors. Panzerfaust teams hid behind the fallen walls. And somewhere near the cathedral, a panther waited, its long gun poised like a spear above the wreckage. The stage was set for the most documented World War II tank battle ever filmed. The first blow came swiftly. 2 Shermans from Fox Company crept along Komödienstrasse, searching for a path toward the cathedral. Their commanders knew Panthers often struck first, but they had no idea one watched them from just beyond the rubble. Lieutenant Kellner's tank halted to assess a debris pile. The moment of stillness was fatal. The Panther's 75mm gun thundered, punching through the Sherman's armor with surgical precision. A second shot followed, almost before the dust settled. Fire rushed through the interior. Kellner crawled from the hatch, trailing smoke, his crew wounded or dead. It was a reminder of an old truth that for years the myth of German tank superiority had been carved into American memory through scenes exactly like this. But the battlefield was changing, even if the Panther's crew did not yet know it. Less than a mile away, Eagle 7 idled at an intersection. Early and his crew heard the radio call, Shermans destroyed, near the cathedral. A Panther still active in the city center. Tasking eliminate. This was the challenge. The Pershing had been built for the reason American armor had fought for a heavier gun and stronger armor in the first place. Signal Corps cameraman Jim Bates also heard the transmission. He grabbed his 16mm camera, the same lens that would immortalize the upcoming Cologne Cathedral tank duel, and ran toward the sound of battle. In war, most tank fights vanish into smoke and memory. This one would not. Early, and Bates advanced on foot to scout the Panther's position. From the shattered mezzanine of the Deutsche Arbeitsfront building, they caught sight of it, the Panther, sitting at an intersection turret, pointed west toward the Shermans it had just killed. Its right side, its weakest armor, faced north, fully exposed. The opportunity was almost perfect. Early's plan was simple. Eagle 7 would approach quietly from the north halt at the corner and fire a single round into the Panther's flank. Quick, clean, final. But Panthers were deadly, not just because of steel and optics, but because of the instincts inside them. Lieutenant Bartalbort felt the silence closing in. Something was wrong. He ordered the turret turned toward Marzellenstrasse, toward the very route Eagle 7 would take. The ambush reversed itself in an instant. What should have been a one-sided strike was now becoming the tense heart of Pershing versus Panther. Eagle 7 advanced, unaware the advantage had evaporated. Inside the Pershing, the crew steadied themselves, expecting a clean shot. Instead, when they turned the corner, they were staring straight down the barrel of a Panther, already zeroed on their approach. In wars of machines, survival often comes down to seconds or to the decision made within them. The moment Eagle 7 entered the intersection, the duel stopped being a plan and became pure survival. Davis in the bow gunner's seat saw it first, the Panther's long barrel already fixed on them. His warning shout collided with McVeigh's instinct. Instead of stopping to aim, the Pershing lurched forward into the open gambling movement against certain death. For a heartbeat, both tanks faced each other in absolute clarity, framed by the cathedral's silent towers. Inside the Panther, Lieutenant Bartalbort hesitated. Through his periscope, he saw a silhouette that made no sense. The turret was unfamiliar, the gun too large, the profile unlike any Sherman he had ever fought. In that instant, the Germans confronted what they had dismissed. For months, American armor had evolved. They just didn't know how dangerously. Those seconds of uncertainty were all Clarence Smoyer needed. The gunner of Eagle 7 swung the 90mm into line, not perfectly, not calmly, but urgently, because the next breath could have been the tank's last. He fired while still moving. The recoil kicked the Pershing sideways. The armor-piercing round crossed the 110 meters in a blink and tore through the Panther's right side, igniting fuel and ammunition. Flames erupted at once. German crewmen scrambled out, some burning, some crawling, all abandoning the myth of German tank superiority they had been raised on. The gunner was still inside when Smoyer's second shot struck home, hitting the turret ring with devastating finality. A third round passed through the hull, making certain the Panther could never fire again. 30 seconds. 3 shots. The most famous World War II tank battle ever filmed was over before most soldiers nearby even realized it had begun. The aftermath unfolded in layers. First shock, then recognition, then understanding. Infantrymen rushed past the burning wreck, advancing toward the cathedral, as secondary explosions thudded from inside the Panther's hull. Bates lowered his camera hands, trembling. He knew what he had captured. The film would later play in newsreels across the United States, a visual rebuttal to years of fear. For the first time, Americans saw that Pershing versus Panther was no longer a lopsided contest. Across Cologne, the ripple spread. Tank crews, who had spent months expecting death inside their Shermans, suddenly felt something they had nearly forgotten: confidence. They began requesting transfers to Pershing units. Officers noted the change in morale. This was more than a victory. It was psychological emancipation. But on the German side, the collapse was immediate and quiet. Rumors of an American heavy tank with a 90mm gun swept through armored units. Commanders held impromptu briefings, using crude sketches, warning crews that not all American tanks were Shermans anymore. If the Panther at the cathedral could fall so quickly, then the certainty that had guided German armored tactics for years had died with it. The duel had punctured not just steel, but belief. Yet victory carried its cost. Cologne, west of the Rhine, fell within days, but the 3rd Armored Division paid in blood, 100 casualties in the fighting. Families on both sides would carry absences that no triumph could soften. Even Eagle 7's crew, though alive, carried the invisible weight of what they had witnessed. War never ends neatly. It echoes in memory long after the guns fall silent. And in that intersection, beneath the cathedral's shadow, the burned shell of the Panther smoldered through the night, a monument to a battle that lasted seconds, but reshaped everything that came after. The shock waves of the Cologne Cathedral tank duel traveled far beyond the burning intersection where the Panther fell. For American commanders, the duel confirmed what engineers and front-line crews had been insisting for years, when properly armed American armor could meet German tanks head-on and prevail. The Pershing's performance at Cologne and earlier at Elsdorf provided hard data that no report or laboratory test could match. In the realm of armored warfare, proof on the battlefield carried more weight than any memo. Strategically, the duel demonstrated that the United States had crossed an invisible threshold. For most of the war, American strength rested on numbers. More Shermans, more trucks, more aircraft, more factories. But Pershing versus Panther represented something different. Technological parity achieved under wartime pressure. It signaled that the US could not only outproduce its enemies, but out-innovate them when required. For military planners and political leaders alike, this shift in capability foreshadowed the industrial technological posture America would adopt during the Cold War. Among allies, the reaction was equally significant. British and Canadian units, long accustomed to fighting with undergunned Churchill and Cromwell tanks, viewed the Pershing's arrival with interest and relief. The Western Front's armored imbalance was beginning to stabilize. The duel became a conversation piece in staff meetings and intelligence assessments. If 20 Pershings could change morale and tactics, what would 200 mean? What about the 2,000? On the German side, the psychological collapse was more severe than any tactical loss. Crews, who had once entered battle with confidence, now hesitated, knowing the enemy might field a tank capable of piercing Panther armor at combat ranges. The myth of German tank superiority, already cracking under relentless Allied pressure, finally shattered. Analysts in Berlin received frantic reports describing a new American heavy tank, but they lacked photographs, specifications, even a proper silhouette. The uncertainty was itself a weapon. For neutral nations and distant observers, the duel offered a stark illustration of a broader truth about modern war industrial capacity. Not battlefield heroics alone determined survival. The United States had mobilized factories capable of transforming strategic decisions into steel realities within months. Germany, by contrast, had engineered brilliant machines, but could no longer build enough of them or train crews fast enough to matter. In this sense, the World War II tank battle at Cologne became more than a dramatic encounter. It revealed the future. A world in which wars would be shaped as much by assembly lines and innovation cycles as by tactics and terrain. A world in which hesitation, whether on the battlefield or in the design room, could cost everything. In the quiet, after the flames died down, the scorched hull of the Panther remained at the intersection, like a final punctuation mark, a reminder that even the most decisive battles can pass in moments. The Cologne Cathedral tank duel lasted barely 30 seconds, yet its echoes carried across armies, nations, and decades. For the men who fought there, it was not legend. It was noise, heat, fear, and duty compressed into half a minute. Only later did the world begin to understand what those seconds revealed. For Eagle 7's crew, the victory did not feel triumphant. They advanced into Cologne, with smoke still rising behind them, thinking not of glory, but of the Sherman crews who had died minutes earlier. Even long after the war, Clarence Smoyer turned away from fireworks and war films, carrying the invisible scars that accompany any World War II tank battle. His courage at the moment of truth in Pershing sus Panther became part of military history, but he never treated it as anything other than survival. On the German side, Lieutenant Barthelborth lived with a different burden, the hesitation born of uncertainty. He had expected Shermans. Instead, he encountered the future of American armor, a tank his army had not prepared him to recognize. His moment of doubt became a symbol of how quickly certainty can collapse when confronted with new realities. The myth of German tank superiority, once so deeply rooted in training and doctrine, dissolved in the fire that consumed this panther. The larger meaning of the duel belongs not to machines, but to choices. It showed how technology delayed can cost thousands of lives, and how technology delivered even late can shift the balance of a war. It proved that industrial power, when aligned with strategic necessity, becomes a force as decisive as any gun on the battlefield. That truth would shape the Cold War and every modern army that followed. And yet the most enduring legacy of Cologne is human. Years after the duel, Smoyer returned to the city, met a former German tanker, and stood beside the grave of a civilian killed in the crossfire. Two enemies grown old shared grief instead of gunfire. In their silence, the real cost of war became clear. So, what should we remember from that intersection? Beneath the cathedral's shadow, that history can hinge on seconds, that courage is quiet, that innovation matters, and that every battlefield, no matter how small, leaves stories that outlive the steel. If this chapter moved you, consider sharing your own thoughts. What lesson do you think the world should carry forward from the Cologne Cathedral tank duel? And which moment in armor history should we explore next?